For Calgary Foothills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the time today to speak to Bill 21, the Emergency Statutes Amendment Act, or shall I say the Control of Everything Everywhere All at Once Part 9 Act. I will not be supporting this bill. Bill 21 completes a trilogy, or maybe doesn't complete. With the nature of these bills, we don't know what is to come next. A trilogy of bills designed to consolidate control in Cabinet. But perhaps this isn't a trilogy after all. Rather, Bill 21 is the most recent book in a long series of seemingly never-ending horror stories. Stories written by the Premier and those who control the UCP, fabricated stories where the belief is the only solution to any perceived problem is to place more authority within Cabinet. Mr. Speaker, I hope you'll allow me a few minutes to reflect on the past several months in this House, and don't worry, I will bring this back to speak directly in the contents of Bill 21. I think it is important to take a moment to reflect on the bills put forward in this House, to build on the theme that was put forward by my colleague from Edmonton to Core, and see that these sets of bills illustrate the government's intent to consolidate power within the Premier's office and with members of Cabinet. There are two elements to this. The first is to, as much as possible, separate Alberta from the federal government and control all aspects of provincial authority, removing all perceived influence from that the federal government may have. The second element is to wrest control from municipalities beyond the basics of repairing potholes and snow removal. The second element also goes beyond municipalities, assuming decision-making authority for all consolidated entities. Asserting provincial jurisdiction over any federal influence began with the Sovereign Alberta Within a United Canada Act, providing the Government of Alberta the ability to ignore any federal program or legislation that this government feels goes against their interests. Not the interests of Alberta, but the interests of this government. This was followed up with the Alberta Pension Protection Act, giving the government the authority to move forward to remove Alberta from the Canada Pension Plan. Despite the fact the federal government does not make investment decisions for the CPP, this government has messaged exactly that. Make no mistake, this government has clearly used language indicating they feel these pension funds and investments and direction of those investments belong to them, not Albertans. And to remove any public perceptions of wrongdoing in the course of their work, we have the Justice Statutes Amendment Act, which changed the rules on gifts and prevents the Ethics Commissioner from releasing the results of an investigation during an election period. Then we have the Public Safety Statutes Amendment Act, opening the possibility of an Alberta Police Service with oversight from a new public agency whose members would be appointed and report to the Minister and Cabinet. Wresting control from municipalities and consolidated entities was kicked off with the Public Health Amendment Act, which removes the authority from the Chief Medical Officer of Health to make decisions in a public health emergency, placing that power in the hands of, you guessed it, the Minister and Cabinet and their hand-picked experts. The government followed this up with the Real Property Governance Act, taking property and buildings from consolidated entities and placing those properties under the direct control of the Minister of Infrastructure to decide what their future use will be. Then they introduced the Canadian Centre of Recovery Excellence Act, allowing the government to set their own agenda for recovery undermining research being done by our academic institutions and Alberta's health agency. This was followed up quite directly with the egregious and very tellingly titled Provincial Priorities Act, although maybe it should have been entitled the UCP Priorities Act, providing the province with ultimate authority over any funding from the federal government to municipalities and consolidated entities, including access for funding for priorities like affordable housing and academic research. The government of Alberta then stepped in to seize ultimate authority over elections and election results from the citizens with the Municipal Affairs Statutes Amendment Act, an act which allows the government to override local decisions, remove elected members of council without justification, or nullify or amend any bylaw that they see fit. So we can see there is a very clear theme as laid out by the member from Edmonton Decore in all of these, and it's not just a trilogy. There are a number of acts that systematically are placing control with Cabinet. And with this newly introduced Emergency Statutes Amendment Act, they have now extended their power to control municipal resources during an emergency and given themselves 6 more months in government without asking any Albertan or consulting anyone, just overriding the rules that are already there and giving themselves another 6 months. I guess they're planning ahead, knowing that the people of Alberta are likely to reinstall an NDP government after learning what has happened just in the last year of this government's mandate. So, Mr. Speaker, in talking about Bill 21, I was in this House the other day listening to the government's debate on the bill. We heard in that debate that challenges faced by municipalities to determine the level of threat and, if it warranted, declaring a state of emergency, that this caused municipalities a great deal of anxiety and that perhaps they needed support from the provincial government in making this critical decision in declaring a state of emergency. However, my understanding is that Bill 21 doesn't alleviate that challenge. The municipality is still responsible for declaring a state of emergency. There's no support from the province in deciding on whether or not that local state of emergency should be declared. The bill does, however, give the province the ability to amend or cancel a local state of emergency that has been declared by the municipality. Doesn't sound like a whole lot of support to me. The bill also permits the province to take control after a local state of emergency has been declared. Neither of these powers in the bill support the municipality with that original decision to declare a local state of emergency. I also heard in debate a description of a high level of cooperation between the province and local municipalities that is already being experienced in emergency situations. The government outlined that there is currently a coordinated, collaborative, integrated approach between the province and the municipalities in dealing with local emergencies. Mr. Speaker, if that is indeed the case, why is Bill 21 necessary? Why does the province feel the need to take control of municipal resources in the event of an emergency if we already have this collaborative, integrated approach between the province and local municipalities? If the challenges faced by a municipality are making a decision to declare a local emergency, receiving provincial support more quickly when an emergency is declared, does Bill 21 actually solve those challenges? I would argue that it does not. And in fact, legislation isn't needed to solve those challenges. What the bill doesn't do is acknowledge the costs incurred by the municipality when the province assumes control and direction over municipal resources. and it also does not require the province to compensate the municipality for any costs incurred. Mr. Speaker, I question why isn't the government moving to support municipalities in their efforts? Why aren't we responding to declared requests for additional training capacity and equipment to respond to emergencies, notably wildfires? Clearly, municipalities were not asking for this legislation. In a bulletin released by the Rural Municipalities of Alberta, dated the 10th of May 2024, the RMA said the proposed amendments to the Emergency Management Act would give the province the authority to take control of local emergency management once a municipality has declared a local state of emergency. The province claims this would only be done upon request of the municipality or when the municipality does not have capacity to manage the situation. However, how these decisions will be made is not clearly defined in the proposed legislation. The RMA stands by its members as the local authority on emergency management. Bill 21 won't provide clarity for additional supports in an emergency situation. In fact, it may actually do the opposite, leaving citizens confused on whether or not the local municipality is leading the emergency response or whether or not the province is leading the emergency response. Bill 21 also amends the Water Act, providing the provincial government the power to authorize inter-basin water transfers in the event of a water emergency. Those decisions can be made outside of normal authorizations, and water basin agreements would not be subject to appeal. Mr. Speaker, water basin decisions and inter-basin transfers are decisions that should not be taken lightly or done in haste. We are talking about a delicate balance of natural systems with a high chance of negative, unintended consequences. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the House too that in recent weeks we have heard the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas proudly declare the voluntary stakeholder agreements that are now in place for the water basins in southern Alberta in dealing with drought. Bill 21 would allow the province to sidestep those voluntary agreements and make unilateral decisions on water allocation. And I wonder why the government, after having worked so hard with those stakeholders for those basin agreements, they would want to sidestep and make their own decisions. I can't leave a discussion on Bill 21 without also talking about the basic affront to democracy. As Bill 21 also conveniently extends the term of this government without asking for permission or consulting with Albertans. The argument being made is that the likelihood of an emergency situation in May is simply too high and that future elections could be interrupted, as last year's elections were interrupted. Well, not interrupted, but we know that the challenges were faced during those times. So based on that, Bill 21 moves the fixed election date to October, automatically extending the life of this government by 6 months. Mr. Speaker, why did we choose October as the ideal time to hold an election? Why not November, February, or March? Why did the government extend their term rather than shorten it? The next election could be October 2026 rather than October 2027. This decision, without consulting anyone, reinforces this government's commitment to their priority, control. There is no valid argument to extend the term of this government by 6 months. They are extending the life of their government without justification. And so I urge the members of this House to do the right thing. Listen to statements that have been made by rural municipalities across Alberta. Listen to citizens' statements on democracy and vote no to Bill 21. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Fort McMurray.